My name is Eric, and I have seen something that no one should ever witness. It was supposed to be a simple hike. I was an experienced solo backpacker, and Blackwood Forest had always fascinated me. The dense trees, the untouched wilderness, it was a challenge I had been eager to take on, but nothing could have prepared me for what I found. I had been hiking for most of the day, following a well-marked trail when I noticed something strange, a small wooden cabin that wasn't on my map. It looked ancient, its walls covered in moss, its roof partially caved in. My curiosity got the best of me. I approached carefully, calling out to see if anyone was there. No answer. The door was slightly ajar, revealing a dark interior. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and something else, something rotten. The single room was sparsely furnished. An old wooden table, a single chair, and a large trunk against the far wall. But the thing that stood out the most was the carvings on the walls. Symbols, spirals, and what looked like tally marks scratched into the wood. Hundreds of them. Then I saw the journal. It was lying on the table, open to a page filled with frantic handwriting. The ink was smudged, the words almost illegible, but I could still make out some of the entries. It watches from the trees. Don't stay past dark. I hear it whispering my name. A chill ran down my spine. I suddenly felt like I was being watched. I turned, scanning the dark corners of the cabin. My breathing was shallow. The forest outside had gone unnaturally silent. Then the whispers began. Soft at first, like the rustling of leaves, then clearer. Multiple voices, speaking all at once, in a language I didn't understand. The sound was coming from the trunk. I took a step closer. The wood was old, its hinges rusted, but I could hear something shifting inside. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't move. Then, the lid burst open. A figure shot up from the darkness within. Its limbs were impossibly long. Its skin stretched too tightly over its frame. Its face was featureless, except for its eyes, black, hollow voids that swallowed the light. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't look back. I just ran. The whispers turned to screams. The trees twisted around me, and for a moment, I thought the forest itself was alive. I don't know how long I ran, but when I finally collapsed near my car at the edge of the woods, the sounds had stopped. The cabin was gone. I checked my map, my GPS. There was no record of it ever existing, but I know what I saw. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still hear it whispering my name. My name is Jason, and I should have never stopped at that gas station. It was supposed to be a quick drive through the countryside. I had planned a solo road trip, a way to clear my head after a rough breakup. My route took me past Blackwood Forest, a place I had only heard about in hushed tones. I never believed the stories until that night. I had been driving for hours when I realized I was almost out of gas. The only station for miles was a small, run-down place on the edge of the forest. The lights flickered, and the attendant looked like he hadn't seen another human in weeks. As I filled my tank, I noticed an old, yellowed map pinned to the station's wall. Scrawled in red ink across the forest's boundaries were the words, "Stay on the road." I asked the attendant about it, but he just shook his head. "People get lost out there. Don't stop. Don't explore. Just drive." I laughed it off and got back in my car. But 15 minutes down the road, something caught my eye, a shadowy figure standing just beyond the trees. My headlights barely illuminated it, but I could tell it was tall, unmoving. I slowed down. Big mistake. The figure moved, not walked, not ran. It shifted, glitching like a broken video, appearing closer without ever actually stepping forward. My pulse hammered in my ears. I slammed the gas pedal, speeding up, trying to convince myself I was seeing things. Then, the road ended. It wasn't a dead end. It just stopped. The asphalt vanished into an endless stretch of trees that shouldn't have been there. My GPS spun wildly, unable to locate me. I turned around, but the road I had come from was gone. I was trapped. The whispers started soon after. At first, they were faint, almost like wind through the branches. Then they grew louder, closer. My name, spoken in a voice I almost recognized. Then I saw them. Figures lined the trees, their faces obscured by darkness. They didn't move, but I could feel them watching. My hands trembled as I gripped the wheel. I didn't know what else to do. I hit the gas and plowed forward, straight into the forest. Branches scraped against my car, shadows flickered in my mirrors. The whispers turned into screams, a cacophony of voices demanding I turn back. But there was no turning back. Just as I thought I was done for, the trees parted. The road reappeared beneath my tires. I swerved back onto the asphalt, my breath coming in ragged gasps. When I dared to look in the rearview mirror, the forest was still there, but the figures were gone. I didn't stop driving until the sun rose, and even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. That night changed me, because now, every time I drive past a dark stretch of trees, I see the words in my mind, "Stay on the road." My name is David, and I barely escaped with my life. It started as a harmless camping trip with my cousin, Luke. We had planned everything carefully, packed enough supplies, mapped our route, and even notified people where we were going. The Blackwood Forest was supposed to be just another adventure. We set up camp near a small creek, the sound of the flowing water adding a peaceful ambience to our evening. We ate, laughed, and enjoyed the isolation. But as night fell, an unsettling feeling crept over me. The forest was too quiet. No chirping crickets, no rustling leaves, just a suffocating silence. Then we saw the footprints. They weren't ours. They were large, deep, and they circled our camp. Luke's face went pale as he pointed at them. These weren't here before. We shone our flashlights around, scanning the trees, but nothing moved. The unease grew heavier, pressing against my chest like an invisible weight. We decided to stay close to the fire, our only source of comfort. Then came the breathing, slow, heavy, and deliberate, like something massive, inhaling and exhaling just beyond the tree line. We held our breath, straining to see what lurked in the darkness. My grip tightened around the knife in my hand. Luke whispered, "We need to go." I nodded, but as soon as we started packing, something stepped closer. The branches cracked under an unseen weight. The breathing became louder, accompanied by a low growl. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs felt cemented to the ground. The fire flickered violently, casting shifting shadows all around us. Then, we saw it. Two glowing eyes, large and unnatural, peered at us from between the trees. A hulking shape loomed in the darkness, just out of reach of our light. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't human. It was something else. Something ancient. Then it charged. Luke screamed, grabbing my arm, yanking me away as the thing lunged. We ran blindly, crashing through the underbrush, not caring where we went as long as we got away. The growls followed, the heavy footsteps shaking the ground beneath us. We ran until our legs gave out. When we finally stopped, gasping for air, the forest was silent again. No growls, no breathing, just the sound of our frantic heartbeats. Our camp was gone. We never found it again. To this day, I don't know what we saw in those woods, but I do know one thing. Something out there is watching, and it doesn't want to be found. My name is Thomas, and I learned the hard way that some places are never meant to be found. I was an avid hiker, always searching for new trails to explore. Blackwood Forest had been on my list for years, but something about it unsettled me. Maybe it was the stories, the ones about people disappearing without a trace, or the whispers about a place that didn't appear on any map. That place found me. I had been following a familiar path when I noticed something off trees that seemed identical. A stretch of the trail that felt like I had walked it before. My GPS flickered erratically, struggling to pinpoint my location. I should have turned back. Instead, I pressed on, then I saw a path that wasn't there before. Narrow and overgrown, leading into the thickest part of the woods. My gut told me to ignore it. My curiosity told me otherwise. I stepped in. The deeper I went, the quieter everything became. No birds, no rustling leaves, just an eerie, oppressive silence. The air was thick, heavy, charged with something unseen. Then I saw them torn pieces of cloth hanging from branches, old hiking gear scattered along the path, rotting as if they had been there for decades. A backpack lay half buried in the dirt, its contents spilled out. I crouched down, picking up a weathered notebook. The pages were damp, barely legible, but I could still make out a few words. It won't let me leave. A branch snapped behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding. There was nothing. Just trees, stretching endlessly, in every direction. But something had changed. The path I had taken was gone. The forest had shifted. A sharp whisper cut through the silence. I don't know what it said, but I felt it. A force, a presence, looming just beyond my sight. My breath came in ragged gasps as I tried to retrace my steps, but every turn led me back to the same place. The trees seemed to move when I wasn't looking. Then I saw them shadowy figures standing just out of focus, surrounding me, watching. Their faces were obscured, their outlines flickering like candlelight. I stumbled backward, my pulse hammering in my ears. Then they spoke, all at once. A chorus of voices, whispering, echoing, repeating the same word over and over. Stay. I ran. I don't remember how, but I ran. My legs burned, my lungs screamed, and just when I thought I would collapse, I burst through the tree line and into the familiar trail. The whisper stopped. I turned back. The path was gone. I never should have followed it. To this day, I don't hike alone, because I know that some trails weren't meant to be walked and some places never let you leave. My name is Daniel, and this is the story of the most terrifying night of my life. It all started when my friends and I decided to go on a camping trip deep into the Blackwood forest. We had heard rumors about strange occurrences in the area, but we dismissed them as nothing more than urban legends. We were eager for adventure, and the idea of spending a few nights in the wilderness excited us. The first day was nothing out of the ordinary. We set up our tents near a small, secluded clearing, built a fire, and spent the evening sharing ghost stories. The night was eerily quiet, with only the occasional sound of an owl hooting in the distance. But as the hours passed, the atmosphere began to change. It started with a whisper at first. I thought it was the wind rustling through the trees, but then I realized it was different, soft, indistinct voices, murmuring just beyond the reach of our firelight. I glanced at my friends, expecting one of them to mention it, but they were all engaged in conversation, seemingly unaware. "Did you hear that?" I finally asked. They paused, listening intently. "Hear what?" "Jason, my best friend, replied." I shook my head, uncertain. "I thought I heard ... whispering." The group laughed it off, teasing me for letting the ghost stories get to my head. But as the night went on, the whispers grew louder. They seemed to come from all around us, circling the campsite, moving between the trees. I wasn't the only one who noticed anymore. "Okay, this isn't funny anymore," Sarah muttered, her voice tight with unease. "Maybe it's just some campers messing with us," Mark suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. We called out, demanding that whoever was out there show themselves. but there was no response. The voices continued, growing more insistent, more frantic. They didn't sound human anymore. Then came the laughter. Low, guttural, and utterly inhuman. It sent chills racing down my spine. The fire flickered violently, as if an unseen force had swept through the clearing. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, twisting and shifting like they were alive. A cold dread settled over us, an instinctive fear that told us we were no longer alone. "We need to leave now," Sarah whispered. None of us argued. We scrambled to grab our things, but the moment we stepped beyond the light of the fire, the whispers turned into screams. It was deafening. Voices cried out in agony, in rage, in hunger. I could feel something brushing against my skin, unseen. Hands clawing at my clothes, my hair. I ran blindly, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The others were right behind me, their panicked footsteps pounding against the forest floor. We didn't stop running until we reached the car. The moment we crossed the tree line, the sound stopped. The forest was silent once more, as if nothing had happened. We wasted no time piling into the vehicle and speeding away, leaving our tents, our belongings, everything behind. We never went back to this day. I don't know what we encountered in that forest, but sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet, I swear I can still hear the whispers. My name is Daniel, and I should have never set foot inside that abandoned hotel, that it was supposed to be just another exploration. The old Holloway Grand Hotel had been shut down for decades, its once glamorous halls now rotting under layers of dust and decay. There were stories, of course, whispers of guests who checked in but never checked out, of voices echoing through empty corridors. But I was never one to believe in ghost stories until that night. I slipped through a broken side door, my flashlight casting long, uneasy shadows along the peeling wallpaper. The lobby was eerily intact, as if it had been frozen in time. A massive chandelier hung above, its crystals dulled with age. The check-in desk still had a bell, covered in a thick layer of dust. I tapped it. The chime echoed, unnaturally loud. Then the elevator dinged. I turned, my stomach tightening. The doors slid open, revealing an empty, dimly lit interior. The button for the 7th floor was already pressed. I wasn't planning on going up, but the doors didn't close. The air in the lobby grew heavier, colder. My breath came out in a mist. I felt watched. Then, a whisper, soft and inviting. Going up. My blood ran cold. I bolted for the exit, but the lobby had changed. The door I came through was gone. The grand staircase twisted impossibly, stretching higher than it should. The chandeliers flickered. The front desk bell rang on its own. Then, footsteps, slow, deliberate. I turned just as a figure stepped out of the elevator. It was dressed in a dusty bellhop uniform, its face obscured by darkness except for its grin. A wide, unnatural grin. It took a step toward me. I ran. I sprinted through endless corridors that shouldn't have existed, past doors that led nowhere, past mirrors that reflected things that weren't me. My flashlight flickered, and in every brief burst of light, I saw them. More figures, more grins, more guests. I don't remember how I escaped. One moment I was trapped, the next I was outside, gasping for air under the cold night sky. The hotel loomed behind me, unchanged, indifferent. But I know I didn't leave alone, because every night, since then, when I turn off my lights, I hear it, a chime, and a whisper, going up. My name is Daniel, and I should have never set foot inside that abandoned hotel. It was supposed to be just another exploration. The old Holloway Grand Hotel had been shut down for decades, its once glamorous halls now rotting under layers of dust and decay. There were stories, of course, whispers of guests who checked in but never checked out, of voices echoing through empty corridors. But I was never one to believe in ghost stories until that night. I slipped through a broken side door, my flashlight casting long, uneasy shadows along the peeling wallpaper. The lobby was eerily intact, as if it had been frozen in time. A massive chandelier hung above, its crystals dulled with age. The check-in desk still had a bell, covered in a thick layer of dust. I tapped it. The chime echoed, unnaturally loud. Then the elevator dinged. I turned, my stomach tightening. The door slid open, revealing an empty, dimly lit interior. The button for the 7th floor was already pressed. I wasn't planning on going up, but the doors didn't close. The air in the lobby grew heavier, colder. My breath came out in a mist. I felt, watched, then a whisper, soft and inviting. Going up. My blood ran cold. I bolted for the exit, but the lobby had changed. The door I came through was gone. The grand staircase twisted impossibly, stretching higher than it should. The chandeliers flickered. The front desk bell rang on its own. Then, footsteps slow, deliberate. I turned just as a figure stepped out of the elevator. It was dressed in a dusty bellhop uniform, its face obscured by darkness, except for its grin. A wide, unnatural grin. It took a step toward me. I ran. I sprinted through endless corridors that shouldn't have existed, past doors that led nowhere, past mirrors that reflected things that weren't me. My flashlight flickered, and in every brief burst of light, I saw them. More figures, more grins, more guests. The corridors stretched infinitely. The paintings on the walls changed as I passed them, portraits of unfamiliar people, each of them staring at me. Their expressions twisted the farther I ran. Some smiled, some frowned, but all of them watched. I turned a corner and nearly tripped over something, an old suitcase, sitting in the center of the hall. The tag was faded, the name scrawled in handwriting I didn't recognize. It was mine. Panic surged through me. I hadn't brought anything with me. I had never stayed in this hotel before, had I? The air turned thick, suffocating. The walls felt closer, the ceiling lower. Shadows moved unnaturally across the floor, stretching toward me. Then, a voice, deep and echoing, rumbled through the hallway. "Your room is ready." The doors lining the corridor burst open all at once, revealing nothing but blackness inside. The scent of old wood and something foul wafted out. The figures emerged, twisted versions of people who had checked in and never checked out. They moved toward me, their mouths stretching into unnatural smiles, their hollow eyes locking onto mine. I forced my legs to move, sprinting toward the nearest stairwell. My heart pounded so loudly I couldn't hear my own breathing. The stairs twisted as I climbed, leading me to hallways I hadn't seen before, hallways that shouldn't exist. Finally, I found a door with an exit sign flickering above it. I shoved it open and stumbled into the night. The cold air hit me like a wave, and when I turned back, the hotel was different. It looked untouched, pristine, as if it had never been abandoned at all. The windows glowed warmly, and inside, I saw silhouettes of people moving, chatting, drinking at the bar. The grand doors creaked open slightly, and standing there was the bellhop. Still grinning, he raised a hand and tipped his hat. I ran until my lungs burned. I never went back. But every night, when the world is silent and I start to drift off to sleep, I hear it, a chime and a whisper, going up. My name is Ryan, and I should have never stepped into that abandoned asylum. It was supposed to be a thrill-seeking adventure. My friends and I had always been drawn to urban exploration, and the old Blackwood Asylum was the ultimate prize. It had been abandoned for decades, its halls rumored to be filled with the echoes of its tragic past. Stories of vanished trespassers and ghostly figures lurking in the windows only added to its dark allure. The moment we crossed the rusted gate, an eerie stillness settled over us. The air was thick with decay and something else, something unseen. We pushed forward, flashlights slicing through the darkness, illuminating peeling wallpaper, overturned gurneys, and shattered glass. Then came the whispers. At first I thought it was just the wind slipping through the broken windows, but as we moved deeper inside, the sounds grew clearer, soft voices, murmuring just out of reach. My breath hitched when I realized they weren't coming from one place. They were everywhere, surrounding us. "Guys, we should leave," Sarah whispered, her grip tightening on my arm. But Jason, always the skeptic, laughed. "It's just the building settling. Don't be paranoid," we continued, despite every instinct telling me to turn back. The deeper we went, the colder it got. Our breaths came out in misty puffs, even though it was the middle of summer. Then, we reached the patient rooms. The doors stood slightly ajar, each one leading into a small, crumbling cell. A few still had their beds bolted to the floor, rusted, chains dangling from the walls. The whispering grew louder. I could swear I heard my name. That's when we saw it. A single wheelchair sat at the end of the hall, facing away from us. It hadn't been there before. As we stared, the chair moved, slowly, deliberately. It rolled backward, scraping against the cracked tiles until it faced us. Empty then. The doors slammed shut, every single one. Sarah screamed. Jason cursed. We ran, sprinting for the exit, but the hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, the asylum itself refusing to let us go. Shadows flickered in our peripheral vision, and the whispers turned into agonized wails. Finally, we burst through the main doors, collapsing onto the dirt. The night air was warm again. The asylum stood silent, as if nothing had happened. We never spoke of that night. Jason, once the skeptic, refused to say a word about what he saw. Sarah moved away, swearing she could still hear the whispers in her dreams, and me. I haven't stepped into an abandoned building since, because I know now some places never forget, and some doors should never be opened. My name is Mark, and I wish I had never entered that abandoned school. The old Blackwood Academy had been shut down for decades, its once pristine halls now crumbling under the weight of time. Rumors swirled about why it had closed, stories of students who vanished, a headmaster who lost his mind, and classrooms that seemed to whisper when no one was around. It was the kind of place that begged to be left alone. But of course, I didn't listen. I was drawn to its mystery, desperate to uncover whatever secrets lay hidden behind its boarded-up doors. With nothing but a flashlight and a growing sense of regret, I stepped inside. The air was stale, thick with the scent of mold and decay. My footsteps echoed unnaturally down the empty corridor, bouncing off the graffiti-covered walls. Desks were overturned. Lockers stood half open, their contents spilling onto the dusty floors. Yet, despite the ruin, something about the school felt untouched, like it was waiting for something or someone. Then, I heard it. A faint tapping, steady, rhythmic. It was coming from one of the classrooms. My flashlight flickered as I moved toward the sound, my breath catching in my throat. The door creaked as I nudged it open, revealing a room frozen in time. Desks neatly arranged, a chalkboard covered in faint writing, and at the very front a single desk. The lid slowly opening and closing on its own. The tapping stopped. I froze, my pulse thundering in my ears. Then, from the back of the room, a whisper, "You're late." Every hair on my body stood on end. The desk slammed shut with a deafening bang, and suddenly, the classroom wasn't empty anymore. Figures sat in the desk's shadows, their faces blurred and indistinct. The teacher's chair creaked as it turned, revealing something that wasn't human staring back at me with hollow black eyes. The door behind me slammed shut. I stumbled backward, my flashlight flickering violently as the whispers grew louder. The figures in the desks twitched, their heads snapping toward me in unison. The teacher stood up. I ran. I don't know how I got out, but somehow, I did. 1 second, I was inside, surrounded, and the next I was outside, gasping for breath under the cold night sky. The school loomed behind me, silent, unmoving, but I could feel something watching from the broken windows. I never went back, and I never will, because sometimes, when I pass by that place, I swear I hear it again, the tapping, and the whisper, "You're late." My name is Alex, and I should have never entered that abandoned mansion. The old Holloway Manor had stood on the outskirts of town for over a century. Its decaying structure loomed over the landscape like a forgotten relic, its windows shattered, its gates rusted shut. People whispered about it, the disappearances, the eerie lights that flickered at night, the sounds of furniture moving on its own. But, like an idiot, I ignored the warnings. I had always been fascinated by the unknown, and when my best friend Ethan dared me to step inside, I couldn't resist. Armed with a flashlight and a camera, I pried open the rotting wooden door and stepped into darkness. The air inside was thick with dust and the scent of mildew. My footsteps echoed eerily through the vast, empty halls. The wallpaper was peeling, the grand staircase sagged under years of neglect, and cobwebs clung to the chandeliers above. Yet, despite its decay, the house didn't feel abandoned. It felt occupied. I pressed forward, the floorboards groaning beneath me. As I turned a corner, a massive painting caught my eye. It depicted the Holloway family stiff formal, their expressions eerily lifeless. But one thing sent a chill through my bones. The eyes in the painting. They were looking at me. I swallowed hard and moved past it, convincing myself it was just a trick of the light. But as I ventured deeper, I noticed something else, faint footprints in the dust. They led toward a door at the end of the hall. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to turn around. Instead, I reached out and pushed the door open. Inside was a dimly lit parlor, untouched by time. A single armchair sat before a cold fireplace, a book resting on its seat, as if someone had just been reading it. And then I heard it, a whisper. Not from behind me, not from the hall, from the chair. The book slammed shut. I stumbled backward, my flashlight flickering wildly. The shadows in the room twisted, elongating, stretching toward me. A guttural growl filled the air, and the chair scraped across the floor. Turning slowly to face me, I ran. I don't remember how I got out. One moment I was in that room, the next I was outside, gasping for breath. The mansion stood silent, dark, indifferent to my terror. I never told Ethan what I saw that night. I barely believe it myself, but sometimes, when I pass the Holloway Manor, I swear I see someone standing in the window, watching, waiting, and I know if I ever step inside, a demon won't be coming back. My name is Adam, and I should have never stopped in that strange gas station. I was driving through a long stretch of empty highway, the kind where you can go miles without seeing another car. The gas gauge was dipping dangerously close to empty, when I spotted a lone station on the side of the road. The neon sign flickered weakly. Miller's Gas and Rest. The place looked abandoned. Rusted pumps, a cracked window, a flickering light above the entrance. But I didn't have a choice. I pulled in, turned off the engine, and stepped out. A bell chimed as I pushed the door open. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of dust and something metallic. Behind the counter stood an old man, his skin pale, his eyes sunken. "Help you?" he asked, his voice dry, as if he hadn't spoken in days. I nodded. "Yeah, just need a fill-up." He stared at me for a long moment before slowly nodding. "Pumps on cash only." I handed him a few bills, then turned to leave. That's when I noticed them framed photographs lining the back wall. Black and white pictures of customers, decades apart. standing in this very gas station, and then I saw myself in the most recent photo. My stomach dropped. I had never been here before. I stumbled back, my pulse hammering. The old man didn't move, didn't blink. "That ain't you yet," he said softly, "but it will be." A gust of wind rattled the door. The station suddenly felt smaller, suffocating. The walls seemed to shift, the pictures flickering like static. I needed to get out, now. I bolted outside, fumbling for my keys. The gas pump was running, except my tank was already full. I hadn't even touched it. Then, from behind me, I heard it, a whisper. "Stay." I didn't look back. I threw myself into the car, turned the ignition, and peeled out of the lot, gravel spraying behind me. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel, refusing to glance in the rearview mirror. After what felt like hours, I finally stopped at a diner down the road. I stumbled inside, out of breath, desperate for normalcy. "You look like you've seen a ghost," the waitress joked as she poured my coffee. I almost laughed until I saw the framed picture behind the counter. It was the same gas station, and in the window, barely visible, was the old man, smiling. I ran out of there without finishing my drink. But no matter where I go, no matter how many miles I drive, I know it's still waiting for me, and one day, I'll end up back there, just like everyone else in those pictures. My name is James, and I should have never set foot in that cursed town. I was on my way to visit an old friend, driving through a rural stretch of road when a sudden storm forced me to take an unfamiliar detour. My GPS lost signal, and before I knew it, I found myself on a narrow dirt road leading to a town I had never heard of. Black Hollow. It looked normal at first. Quaint houses, a main street with old-fashioned shops, even a little diner with its lights on. But as I drove deeper, something felt wrong. The streets were empty, too empty. No movement, no sound, not even the wind rustling through the trees. A sign ahead read, "Welcome to Black Hollow. Population 201. I blinked. The number changed, 202. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the sign, convinced I had imagined it. Then my car engine sputtered and died. No warning, no sign of trouble, just dead silence. I tried the ignition again. Nothing. A door creaked open nearby. I turned to see an old man standing on a porch, watching me with empty, unblinking eyes. "You best get inside," he said. "Storm's coming." The sky was clear. Something deep in my gut told me to refuse. But as I glanced down the road, I saw them figures, standing in the shadows, motionless, waiting. The hairs on my neck rose. I grabbed my bag and followed the old man inside. The house smelled of dust and something faintly metallic. The furniture was antique, but it looked untouched, like it had been staged for a guest that never came. The old man gestured to a chair by the fireplace. "Sit," he said. "They won't come in as long as the fire's burning." I hesitated. "Who won't come in?" His cloudy eyes met mine. "The ones who don't belong." A shiver ran down my spine. I turned toward the window and saw them again, more figures, now closer, just beyond the porch. Their faces were wrong, blurred and shifting, like static on an old television. Then the whispering started, soft at first, like leaves rustling in the wind. Then clearer. "You are one of us now." The room dimmed. The fire flickered. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. The old man stood suddenly, his face twisted in urgency. "You need to go now." I didn't question it. I grabbed my bag and bolted outside. My car's headlights flickered on by themselves, the engine suddenly roaring back to life. I dove inside, slammed the door, and hit the gas as I sped down the road. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The town was gone. Nothing but trees and an empty stretch of highway remained. No houses, no diner, no people. Just a single road sign standing, alone in the dark. "Welcome to Black Hollow." population 201, and beneath it, scratched into the wood, we never let them leave. My name is Lucas, and I should have never spent the night in that cursed motel. I was driving cross-country, exhausted and desperate for a place to rest, when I stumbled upon the Hollow Pine Motel. A neon sign buzzed weakly in the dark. Half the letters burnt out, but the vacancy light glowed bright. The place looked like it hadn't been touched in decades, yet something about it felt occupied. I stepped inside, the bell above the door jingling as I approached the counter. A man, pale and stiff, stood behind the desk, his expression unreadable. His name tag read Edgar. "Need a room?" he asked, voice flat. I hesitated. "Yeah, just for the night." He slid a key across the counter. "Room 7. No noise after midnight." I forced a chuckle. "Motel policy." Edgar didn't smile. "Something like that." I grabbed the key and made my way down the dimly lit corridor. The air smelled of dust and something metallic, like old blood. My room was at the end of the hall. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was normal, outdated, but nothing out of the ordinary. A bed, a nightstand, an old TV. The bathroom door creaked when I pushed it open, revealing a small, stained sink and a mirror that looked far too clean compared to the rest of the room. Then I saw it, a note, wedged between the mirror and the wall. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. "Do not look at them. Do not open the door. Nitrogen monoxide matter what you hear." A chill ran down my spine. I turned, scanning the room. Nothing seemed out of place, just my overactive imagination messing with me. Then, at exactly midnight, the knocking started soft at first, barely more than a tap, but it came from the window. I was on the second floor, my breath hitched. I stayed frozen, staring at the thin curtains. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. Then from the door, tap, 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 dot. I backed up against the wall, heart hammering. A voice low and distorted slithered through the doorframe. "Lucas, let us in." I didn't move, didn't breathe. A long silence stretched out. Then, the doorknob twisted. I clamped my hand over my mouth, holding back a whimper. The knob rattled violently. Shadows slipped under the door, stretching unnaturally across the carpet. My pulse pounded in my ears as I reached for my phone. No signal. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the knocking stopped. The air felt heavier, suffocating. I stayed up the entire night, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen. When dawn finally came, I crept toward the door and slowly peeked outside. The hallway was empty. I grabbed my bag and bolted downstairs. Edgar was at the front desk, exactly where I had left him, staring ahead blankly. "Checking out?" he asked. I nodded, sliding the key onto the counter. My hands were shaking. Who was knocking on my door last night? For the first time, his lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. They always knock. I didn't ask anything else. I rushed to my car and sped off, leaving the Hollow Pine Motel in the dust. But even now, when I'm alone in my apartment at night, I hear it tap, 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 and I know, one day, they'll find me again, and this time, I won't be able to keep the door closed. My name is Ethan, and I should have never stopped in that quiet little town. I was on a road trip, passing through unfamiliar back roads when my car's engine sputtered and died. Stranded in the middle of nowhere, I had no choice but to walk. That's when I saw the sign, "Welcome to Ravenswood." It was a small town, the kind you'd see in old postcards, quaint, picturesque, untouched by time. But something about it felt off. The streets were empty, the air too still. No birds, no wind, no sound except my own footsteps. A gas station sat at the end of the road, its neon sign flickering weakly. I stepped inside, relieved to find an old man behind the counter. "Car trouble?" he asked before I could speak. I nodded. "Yeah, I think my battery's dead. Any place I can get help?" The old man wiped his hands on a rag and gestured toward the town square. "Mechanic's shop is over there, but it's late. Best to wait until morning." Something in his voice unsettled me, but I had no other options. I thanked him and decided to find a place to stay. That's when I noticed something strange. Framed photographs lined the station's walls, showing the same handful of people, in different eras, same faces, different clothes. The bell above the door jingled as I left, and I swore I heard the old man mutter, "You shouldn't have stopped." As I walked through the town, it became clear that Ravenswood was frozen in time. Storefronts displayed outdated newspapers. The streetlights buzzed faintly, casting shadows that stretched too far. But the worst part, the people, they were watching me, from windows, from alleyways, from the edges of my vision, never moving, never blinking, just watching. I quickened my pace, heart hammering in my chest. Then, in the distance, I heard a low, droning hum. Faint at first, but growing louder. The streetlights flickered. A shadow passed over the town square. Then they started walking. The people who had been so still, so silent, were now moving in unison. Their faces were expressionless, their eyes vacant. They weren't coming toward me. They were heading toward the church at the end of the street. A cold dread settled in my stomach. I ducked into an alley, pressing myself against the brick wall. The hum grew deafening, vibrating through my bones. Something was coming. I peeked out just as the church doors swung open. Darkness spilled out, thick and unnatural, swallowing the figures as they entered. The hum became a chorus, a deep, otherworldly chant that made my skin crawl. The last person stepped inside, and the doors slammed shut. Silence, then a whisper right behind me. "It's almost midnight." I turned. Nothing was there. I ran. I sprinted back toward my car, my breath ragged, my mind screaming at me to get out. When I reached it, the engine started without hesitation. I didn't question it. As I sped away, I stole one last glance. In the rearview mirror, Ravenswood was gone. No town, no sign, just an empty stretch of road. But even now, when the clock strikes midnight, I still hear the hum, and I know that somewhere, Ravenswood is still waiting for the next traveler to stop. My name is David, and I should have never gone into that abandoned subway station. I've always been fascinated by urban exploration, crumbling buildings, forgotten tunnels, places that time has erased from memory. The Holloway subway station had been closed since the 1970s, sealed off after a series of unexplained deaths. It was rumored to be cursed, a place where people entered but never came back. I didn't believe the stories, not until I found the entrance. It was hidden behind a chain-link fence, rusted and half collapsed. My flashlight flickered as I stepped into the dark, the air thick with the stench of mildew and rot. The walls were covered in graffiti, warnings scrawled in desperate handwriting. "Don't. Look at them, they see you too. Once you hear the voice, it's too late." I brushed them off as urban legend nonsense and pressed forward. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional drip of water from the ceiling. The old tracks stretched into endless darkness, the skeletal remains of subway cars rusting along the platform. Then, I heard it. A train horn. It was distant, faint, like an echo from another time. My pulse quickened. The station had been abandoned for decades. No trains should have been running. And yet, the sound was getting louder. A gust of wind blew past me, carrying with it a whisper. "He's coming." My stomach turned to ice. The words had been spoken directly into my ear, but I was alone. I spun around. my flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. That's when I saw them. Figures stood along the platform, their outlines flickering like candlelight. They didn't move, they didn't breathe, but I could feel them watching me. My skin crawled as I stepped back, trying to keep my gaze down, but something about them pulled at me. One of them twitched. I bolted. My feet pounded against the concrete as I ran toward the exit, but the station had changed. The walls stretched higher, the tracks twisted into impossible angles. My flashlight flickered again, and for a brief moment, I caught a glimpse of something standing in the tunnel. Not human, not even close. Its limbs were too long, its head tilted unnaturally to the side. It didn't move, but I felt it grinning. The sound of screeching metal filled the air as the phantom train approached, the ground trembling beneath my feet. The whispers returned, rising into a deafening chorus. "He's here." I ran harder, my lungs burning. The entrance was gone. The walls pulsed as if they were alive, shifting, closing in. The figures on the platform turned, their heads snapping toward me in unison. Then, the train arrived. The air split with a shriek of rusted brakes. The subway car doors yawned open, revealing nothing but darkness inside. A final whisper slithered into my ear. "Last stop." I threw myself backward, slamming into something solid. My vision blurred then. Suddenly, I was outside. Daylight. I lay sprawled on the cracked pavement outside the station, my heart hammering. The entrance I had come through was gone, replaced by an unbroken brick wall. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know how I got out, but I do know this. I wasn't alone when I left, because every night since then, when I close my eyes, I hear it, the train horn and the whisper, "Last stop." My name is Oliver, and I should have never helped my friend clean out his grandfather's house. When Thomas called me, he sounded desperate. His grandfather had passed away, leaving behind a massive, decaying house on the outskirts of town. He needed help sorting through the years of clutter and neglect. I agreed without hesitation. I regret it now. The house was unsettling from the moment we arrived. Dust-covered furniture, faded portraits of long-dead relatives, the faint scent of something rotten lingering in the air. But the worst part was the basement. It was the only place Thomas refused to go. "There's something wrong down there," he muttered, handing me the key. "Just grab anything valuable and get out." I should have listened. The basement door groaned as I unlocked it. A wave of cold, stale air washed over me. The stairs creaked beneath my weight as I descended into the darkness. My flashlight flickered, casting shaky beams along the damp stone walls. Then, I saw them, the mannequins, rows of them, standing shoulder to shoulder, dressed in tattered old clothing. Their painted faces were cracked, their eyes black and lifeless. I forced myself to breathe, telling myself they were harmless. Then one of them moved, a slow, shuddering twitch of its fingers. I froze. My flashlight trembled in my grip. The air grew heavier, thick with the feeling of unseen eyes watching me. Then came the whisper, "Who moved us?" My heart nearly stopped. The voice was distant, hollow, but unmistakably real. "Who woke us up?" The mannequins shifted all at once, heads turning, arms raising, stiff bodies shuffling forward. I ran. I scrambled up the stairs, nearly tripping as the whispers grew louder. "You shouldn't have come." The basement door slammed shut behind me. As I stumbled into the hallway, gasping for air, Thomas looked up, startled. "You opened it, didn't you?" he whispered. I couldn't speak. My body shook with terror. That night, I barely slept. And when I finally did, I woke up standing in my bedroom, not in my bed, standing, facing the mirror, and behind me, reflected in the glass, they were there. The mannequins. Watching, waiting, and every night since, they've been getting closer. My name is Nathan, and I should have never opened the basement door in my new apartment. When I moved into the old brick building on Holloway Street, I thought I had found the perfect place. Cheap rent, a decent location, and quiet neighbors. But from the first night, something felt off. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of damp wood, and something metallic. The walls creaked at odd hours, and sometimes, when I turned off the lights, I swore I could hear something moving just beneath the floorboards. Then, I found the basement door. It was at the end of the hallway, set apart from the other apartments. The landlord never mentioned it, and when I asked, he shrugged it off. Locked for a reason, he muttered before changing the subject. That should have been my warning, but I was curious and stupid. One night, I found the key. It was hidden under a loose floorboard in my closet, wrapped in an old, yellowed cloth. I don't know what compelled me, but I took it. I walked to the end of the hall, my pulse quickening, and slid the key into the lock. The door creaked open. A rush of cold air spilled out, carrying a scent so foul I gagged. The stairway led into darkness, deeper than it should have. My flashlight barely pierced the void as I descended, each step groaning beneath my weight. At the bottom, the air was thick, suffocating. The walls were lined with mirrors. They weren't normal. Their glass was warped, like rippling water, frozen in time. My reflection looked wrong, distorted, twisted, shifting when I wasn't moving. Then I saw it, a second reflection. It wasn't behind me. It was inside the mirror. Taller, hunched, its eyes hollow voids. My breath hitched as it raised its hand, mimicking my movements. But then it waved, and I didn't. The whisper started, soft at first, then growing into a chorus of voices echoing through the basement. Let us out. My flashlight flickered. The reflection stepped closer. I turned to run, but my feet wouldn't move. The wall seemed to breathe, the air pressing in. Then the mirrors shattered not onto the floor, but inward, as if something was breaking through from the other side. I tore up the stairs, my ears ringing with the sound of glass crunching behind me. As I reached the top, the basement door slammed. Shut. The whisper stopped. I bolted every lock, pushed furniture against it. I haven't opened it since, but the mirrors in my apartment are different now. They no longer show my reflection, just him. My name is Jacob, and I should have never gone down into the basement of my childhood home. When my parents passed away, I inherited the house I grew up in. A modest place, old but sturdy, nestled at the edge of a quiet town. It held memories, some good, some forgotten. But one part of the house I had always avoided was the basement. It had been locked for as long as I could remember. My father never spoke about it, and my mother changed the subject whenever I asked. The key had been missing for years, but as I sorted through their belongings, I found it tucked inside a small, rusted box beneath my father's bed. Something in me told me to leave it alone. I didn't listen. The basement door groaned as I turned the key, the rusted lock breaking apart like it had been untouched for decades. A foul, damp stench wafted up the stairs, thick with the scent of mildew and something rotten. My flashlight flickered as I descended, the steps creaking beneath my weight. The basement was unlike anything I had imagined. It wasn't just a storage space, it was a chamber. The walls were covered in strange carvings, deep scratches that ran from the floor to the ceiling. And in the center of the room, illuminated by the weak beam of my flashlight, was a mirror. It stood tall, its surface covered in dust, the ornate frame twisting with grotesque, inhuman faces. But what made my skin crawl was the reflection. It wasn't me. The figure standing in the mirror was taller, its limbs slightly too long, its face blurred, shifting, as if struggling to take form. My breath caught in my throat. My body screamed at me to move, to run, to not look away. Then it smiled, a slow, unnatural grin that stretched too far. My knees buckled as the whispers began, soft at first, then rising into a frantic chorus. They came from the walls, the floor, the air itself. He's watching. He's waiting. The reflection stepped forward. The glass didn't break. It simply let him through. I turned and bolted up the stairs, my lungs burning, the whispers turning to shrieks. Just as I reached the top, the basement door slammed shut behind me. Silence. I locked it. I bolted it. I pushed furniture against it, but it didn't matter. Because that night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt it. A presence. I turned over, heart hammering, sweat slick on my skin. There, in the mirror across the room, he was watching. And this time, he wasn't smiling. He was waiting. My name is Ethan, and I should have never opened the trapdoor in my grandmother's house. When she passed away, the house became mine. A small, worn-down farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by miles of empty fields. It wasn't much, but it had been in my family for generations. And I wasn't ready to let it go at first. Everything seemed normal: dusty furniture, faded family photos, creaky floorboards. But there was one thing I couldn't explain. The trapdoor. It was in the kitchen, hidden beneath an old rug. I didn't even know it existed until I moved the furniture around. It was small, heavy, with a rusted metal handle, and nailed shut with thick, uneven boards as if someone had gone to great lengths to keep it closed. I should have left it that way. Instead, curiosity got the best of me. I pried the boards off, the nails screeching as they came loose. The trapdoor swung open with a groan, revealing a narrow wooden staircase leading down into darkness. A damp, musty smell hit me, thick with the scent of decay. I hesitated, but something compelled me forward. The basement was smaller than I expected, lined with crumbling stone walls. Old crates and sacks were stacked in the corners, their contents long since rotted away. But at the center of the room stood something that didn't belong. A wooden crib. It was pristine, untouched by time, its rocking motion eerily smooth, as if someone had just stepped away from it. My stomach turned as I peered inside. It was empty then. The whisper came, soft, faint, a child's giggle. The air turned ice cold. My breath misted in front of me. I backed away, my pulse hammering. But before I could move, the crib lurched forward on its own, slamming against the wall. A sharp cry echoed through the basement, a sound so shrill and unnatural, it sent shivers down my spine. Then, footsteps. Tiny, rapid footsteps, circling me, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. My flashlight flickered, the shadows stretching unnaturally along the walls. A shape darted past the corner of my visions, small, fast, inhuman. I ran. I scrambled up the stairs, my foot slipping on the damp wood. The whispers turned to wails, echoing all around me. Just as I reached the top, the trapdoor slammed shut against my back, nearly crushing me. I bolted out of the house, not stopping until I was in my car, engine roaring, tires kicking up dust. I drove all night, never looking back. The house still stands, still abandoned, still waiting. Sometimes, when I pass through that old, empty road, I see it from a distance. And when the wind is just right, I swear I can hear it, the crib rocking. My name is Daniel, and I should have never gone into that basement. It all started when my uncle passed away, leaving behind an old Victorian house on the outskirts of town. It had been in our family for generations, but no one had lived there for decades. As the sole inheritor, it became my responsibility to sort through his belongings and decide what to do with the place. The house was massive, creaky, and filled with dust-covered furniture and forgotten memories. Most of it was just old junk, antique clocks, faded photographs, moth-eaten books. But there was one place I avoided for as long as I could. The basement. Something about it unsettled me. Maybe it was the fact that the door had 4 different locks on it, each rusted with age. Maybe it was the way the air seemed heavier near the entrance, thick with the scent of damp earth and something foul. But eventually, curiosity won. I found the keys tucked away in my uncle's desk. As I slid the last lock open, a wave of cold air rushed out, sending shivers down my spine. My flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, revealing a long, winding staircase leading into the unknown. I descended slowly, each step groaning beneath my weight. The deeper I went, the stronger the smell became, a mix of mold, rust, and something metallic. At the bottom, I found myself in a massive underground room, lined with shelves of strange artifacts. And then, I saw the chair dot. It sat in the center of the room, surrounded by a circle of crumbling symbols carved into the stone floor. Thick iron restraints were bolted to the armrests. Something told me this wasn't just a chair. I took a cautious step forward. That's when I noticed the walls covered in claw marks. A sharp click echoed behind me. The basement door had shut. I spun around, my flashlight trembling. The air turned suffocatingly cold, my breath coming out in thick puffs. Then, from the darkness, I heard it. A whisper. It wasn't words. Not exactly. It was a sound that crawled under my skin, something ancient and hungry. The chair screeched. As it moved, dragging itself an inch closer to me, my chest tightened with terror. Then, the chains rattled. I bolted up the stairs, heart pounding against my ribs. The whispers turned to guttural growls, echoing all around me. The air thickened, pressing against me, as if unseen hands were reaching out. I threw myself against the door, twisting the handle wildly. It wouldn't budge. The growls turned to laughter, low, guttural mocking. With one final, desperate shove, the door burst open, and I tumbled into the hallway. The moment I hit the floor, the sounds stopped. Silence. No whispers, no growls, just the slow creak of the basement door, closing on its own. I locked every bolt, every latch, every chain. I left that house the next morning, never looking back. I don't know what my uncle was keeping down there. I don't want to know. But every now and then, in the dead of night, I swear I can still hear it. The laughter,